there something that you yearn for so deeply in your soul that if you experienced its fulfillment, that would be enough? Do not be afraid of naming where that gap between where we experience ourselves and the dream of God lies. Simeon recognizes all that hope revealed, fulfilled in that 48-day-old child. Yeah, the Feast of the Presentation is a kind of quirky observance. I mean, we just spent the last couple of weeks remembering Jesus' inaugural acts, right? His turning water into wine at the wedding feast at Cana, which is his inaugural act in John's gospel. And then last week, his inaugural sermon in Luke's gospel, his first sermon there in his hometown. It wasn't very well received. They tried to throw him off a cliff, remember? And then all of a sudden, we've got Jesus as a 48-year-old baby, or 48-day-old baby, 48-year-old baby. That's, yeah, anyway, that would be quirky. But a 48-day-old baby. So we get a little bit of chronological whiplash. Just want to say that out loud. But traditionally, today would be the day we would all need to take down our Christmas decorations. So if you still have your lights up, because you just needed a little more light, it's okay. You're like solid in the tradition. It was often, and sometimes quite literally because of the way Lent falls, some years, not this year, but some years, seen as the end of the Epiphany season as well. So there's this extra emphasis on light, which led for the Feast of the Presentation to be called Candlemas. And there was a time when people would bring all the candles that they would use in the coming year to the church and have them blessed on Candlemas. And what that meant was, just as we do at a baptism when we say, light this candle, you are the light of Christ into the world, light this. Every time they lit a candle, which was, friends, anytime you turn on a light switch, can you imagine being reminded that you are carrying the light of Christ into the world? That often when they would light a candle, they would be reminded of the light of lights, who came here that we might be filled with that light and carry that light into the world. Now, from the sublime to the ridiculous, stay with me. When this tradition came to Germany, another tradition arose around it, also about light and shadow. And the tradition was that if a particular hedgehog saw its shadow, this is true. I'm not even making this up. This particular hedgehog saw its shadow, there would be a second winter. When a bunch of German immigrants came to a certain part of Pennsylvania, like Puxatawny, that hedgehog became a groundhog. Bet you didn't know that. I didn't till this week either, but it's true. So this cartoon at the front of our bulletin, linking the liturgical life and Puxatawny Phil, well, there's actually a traditional ecclesiastical reason for that. And it's all about the power of our awareness of the light of Christ in us and within us. And a reminder again of Christ as both eternal and infinite and immediate, here, now, suddenly. We get this reminder again of both the immediate and the infinite. In fact, we hear the language of immediacy in Malachi, don't we? You will come into his temple suddenly. We hear that same immediacy in the Song of Simeon, which those of you who love evensong probably recognize as the Nunc Dimittis. Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. For these eyes of mine have seen thy salvation, which you have prepared before the face of the people, to be a light to the nations and the glory of your people, Israel. Lord, now, now, that immediacy, both immediate and infinite. And if you want to read the alternative reading from the letter to the Hebrews, which is in the back of the bulletin later, you can do that too, and you get more of that sense of immediacy within the infinite, and how Jesus participating in both the infinite and the immediate is how our salvation as human beings comes about, that there's a completion, a fulfillment by his living a full human life. And there's a fulfillment in his very being. And that fulfillment is what Simeon is responding to. The fulfillment of all the hopes for the redemption of Israel, the liberation, freedom from oppression under the Romans, all of it, that those who were waiting for the Messiah held in their hearts. That's deep and abiding hope. And Simeon recognizes all that hope revealed, fulfilled in that 48-day-old child. I invite you for a moment to imagine, like Simeon, is there something that you yearn for so deeply in your soul that if you experienced its fulfillment, that would be enough? God, you can take me now. I don't need any more. Because that's what Simeon is saying. Lord, now let me depart in peace, because I've seen your salvation. What deep yearning in your heart is so deep and so great? Now, I invite you to that prayerful reflection, knowing that it will inevitably bring up where there is a gap between the immediate and the infinite, a gap between what we experience here and now and the dream of God for this world. And it's okay and important that we acknowledge the great chasm sometimes that is between where we find ourselves and God's dream. Because it's only if we can name and see it and bring our prayer to it that we have a hope of being that light in such a way that God's work of justice and reconciliation and healing and mercy and peace can find its way in the world through us. So I invite you to make that your prayer. Make that your prayer in the week ahead. And don't be afraid. Do not be afraid of naming where that gap between where we experience ourselves and the dream of God lies. Don't be afraid, because it's really important that we trust in this promise that Simeon saw, which is that despite the limitations and the brokenness and the flaws and the sin in the immediate reality in which we find ourselves, in God, in all that is infinite, in the very heart of God, all is well. And all these places of brokenness are healed. And all these places where our present reality falls short of the dream of God, that breach is no longer. And when we can trust in that truth in the heart of God, that can sustain us as we seek to continue to let that light shine through us. Maybe it's a matter of thinking about it this week every time you flip on a light switch. And remember your ancestors in faith who thought it was so important to be reminded of their role to be the light of Christ in the world that they took every single candle they had to be blessed at Candlemas. Maybe it's journaling, maybe it's talking to a friend, maybe it's giving me a call so we can set up a time. But I invite you to be in prayer and invite God to show you what this fulfillment looks like as you place your trust in the light from light.